Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be continuing with our Primarch videos with a quick look at Vulkan, the Primarch of the 18th Space Marine Legion known as the Salamanders. He was renowned for his empathy and metalworking and was also renowned later for an ability that was both a blessing and a curse, immortality. In his youth, when his growth pod was thrown from the Emperor's laboratory by Chaos, Vulkan was flung to the volcanic world of Nocturne. He landed during the time of trials when Nocturne's moon Prometheus passed closest to the planet once every 15 Terran years, causing massive volcanic eruptions and vast destruction across the planet. It is a trial for the people of Nocturne, but the aftermath is a blessing, with newly released mineral wealth covering the land to be used in their industries. It was during this time, when the discoveries were mainly metallic in nature, that the people were surprised to find a young child wandering through the volcanic wastes alone. Taken in by a blacksmith named Nibel, Vulkan was raised as the man's own son. He was huge of frame and quick of mind, with coal-dark skin and eyes that burnt like coals. Within 3 years, Vulkan was teaching the master blacksmiths of Nocturne new forging techniques despite his young age. The planet often suffered from raids by the Dark Eldar, known locally as the Dusk Wraiths, and many of the citizens spent much of their time finding obscure hiding places to be sure they avoided the raiders, although many would still be taken if the raiders attacked. The raids occurred again in Vulkan's 4th year among the people of Nocturne. Refusing to hide, Vulkan confronted the Dark Eldar in the centre of the settlement. 2 great forging hammers crossed his shoulders. Inspired by Vulkan's example, people followed suit, and soon many had joined him at the centre of the village to defend their town and their people. When the Eldar attacked, Vulkan led their defence, a hammer in each hand, and with the Primarch at their fore, the people pushed back the raiders even with their superior technology and poisons, by sheer force of will. Word of this victory soon spread, and the leaders of the 7 largest settlements on Nocturne travelled to meet Vulkan, and after talking with them all, the leaders vowed to follow his example. Never again would they hide from the wraiths, but would fight them off. Vulkan became known as the Fireborn, and the legend of his victory rapidly spread among the people. It was during the celebrations to mark the Primarch's victory over the Eldar, where many tests of strength and craftsmanship would be held as per Nocturne tradition, that a stranger appeared amongst Vulkan's people. He was pale, unlike the fire-blasted skins of Nocturne's natives, and wore clothing never seen before. Arriving as the challenges were announced, he asked only that he be allowed to take part to compete with the others, and declared that he would be the best of everyone there. The people laughed, for who could beat Vulkan, renowned for his intellect, strength, endurance, and craftsmanship that outshone all others? Despite the stranger's apparent arrogance, Vulkan agreed, and even wagered that the loser would serve the victor after the contests were complete. The contests lasted 8 days, and included tests of strength and endurance, such as the anvil lift, where a tie was called after Vulkan and the stranger spent half a day with anvils raised above their heads. After numerous contests, by the last trial on the 8th day, both contestants were tied. The last challenge was to construct a weapon within 24 hours and use it to hunt down the largest salamander, also known as fire drakes, they could find. These were the largest beasts and predators on Nocturne, attracted to heat, and so were usually found high on the lava-strewn volcanoes of the world. Both headed up the local volcano, and after a long hunt, Vulkan found a great fire drake, massive enough to be sure to win him the prize. After killing the beast and heading back, Vulkan was struck with misfortune when the volcano erupted, throwing Vulkan off the cliff top that he had been traversing. Hanging on for dear life by one hand over a deadly drop, Vulkan still held the tail of his prized kill in the other hand, unwilling to lose now after so much effort. He hung there for many hours, any sort of shift in weight liable to send him hurling to his death, as his strength slowly ebbed away, and he knew that he must now decide between his prize and his life. He was about to make that decision when the stranger appeared above them on the cliff top, separated from the hanging Vulkan by a new deep lava flow. Even as he hung, Vulkan could see the stranger's drake was larger than his prize, and he knew he had already lost. However, the stranger, seeing Vulkan's danger, used his own massive salamander as a bridge, hurling it into the lava flow and crossing it quickly. The stranger hauled Vulkan and his prize up to the cliff top, a feat of strength prestigious in itself. Despite his drake being bigger, the stranger had no evidence of it now that it had been burnt to a coal by the lava. Returning to the town empty-handed, the people cheered and declared Vulkan the winner of the tourney. However, to his people's amazement, Vulkan bent a knee to the stranger, revealing how he had been saved and that the stranger was the true victor of the games. How any man who valued the life of another over his own pride was worthy of Vulkan's service. The stranger smiled and at that moment cast off his disguise, unveiling his magnificent form and revealing he was the Emperor of Mankind and Vulkan's true father. Though reunited with the Emperor, Vulkan was not immediately returned to his legion. Subjectively, he was still a young man, the warp having distorted the time it took for him to reach Nocturne. As such, he was taken and tutored by the Emperor, fighting alongside him in the early days of the Crusade. When he did finally rejoin his legion, it was at the head of 3,000 new recruits sent to save the rest of the legion from the hands of a massive orc horde on a dead world of Antium. After a long struggle, the orcs were defeated and the Terran-born Marines finally met their Gene Father and new brothers on the ashes of that dead world. The old Marines knelt before Vulkan, but he bade them rise, and knelt before them to honour their sacrifice to bring the orc threat to a close. Renaming his legion the Salamanders in remembrance of the beast that united Vulkan and his father, Vulkan set to work reforging his legion into a new force from their new fortress base on the moon of Prometheus above Nocturne. It would be a legion dedicated to honour and respect for those they protected, Vulkan keeping the aspects of the old legion's heraldry and organisations whilst integrating the teachings of Nocturne and the salamanders that lived upon it, who were the most powerful beings whilst protecting the others of their kind. He enshrined much of his beliefs in a work known as the Tome of Fire, kept by the salamanders to this day. Joining the crusade with zeal, Vulkan waged a fierce war on the Imperium's enemies, but always strived to minimise collateral damage when facing the enemy. This was not always possible, with Vulkan having to purge a primitive world known as Ibsen that had been tainted by the Eldar. Vulkan's philosophy led to conflicts with some of his brothers, including Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords on the world of Karetan, where the Night Lords were slaughtering a city of innocents to bring the rest of the world into line through fear. Vulkan confronted Kurz about this massacre, and they were unable to resolve their differences amicably. It was during the final battle of this world, after Vulkan had confronted Kurz and was feeling angry for his brother's actions. He was fighting against an Eldar coven who ruled the world, when Vulkan killed a fleeing elder child in a fit of rage after the death of his Remembermancer. Recalling this, it was one of Vulkan's greatest regrets, seeing as he lost control and killed an innocent, even if it was a Xenos. After the campaign ended, Vulkan informed his brothers Horus and Dawn of Kurz's conduct, which scarred their relationship forever after. It was also here when Vulkan intended to gift Horus with a warhammer known as Dawnbringer that he had made himself. However, something in Horus's manner at the time unnerved Vulkan, and he decided to keep the weapon for himself. When Horus turned against the Emperor and the Imperium, Vulkan was one of the 7 Primarchs at the head of their respective legions to travel to Istvan V to bring Horus to heel. However, the invasion was a trap. The Word-Bearers, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors and the Alpha Legion joined the Sons of Horus, the Emperor's Children, the Death Guard and the World Eater traitors, leaving the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands and the Salamanders alone against 8 full traitor legions. It was a massacre. Primarch Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands was killed and his legion barely escaped alongside the Salamanders and the Raven Guard, all of whom were badly mauled. However, Vulkan did not leave with his legion. Caught in the initial nuclear blast fired by the traitors, Vulkan should have died alongside his sons. However, it was here that Vulkan's unique nature revealed itself. The Primarchs had all inherited traits and powers from their father, although they all varied greatly. Vulkan's power was truly unique. Like his father, Vulkan was a Perpetual, an immortal, incapable of dying regardless of the means by which he was killed. Some old accounts say that he was then dragged off to a gunship and evacuated at this stage, but newer reports show a darker truth. Vulkan was alone after the blast, surrounded by enemies, fighting against a tide of Iron Warriors and Night Lords. He was shot, stabbed and bludgeoned innumerable times until his mind could no longer resist the pain and he fell into unconsciousness. Kurz, seeing a chance to torment his brother, stole Vulkan away from the battlefield, leaving many to believe he too had fallen. Kurz spent the next months after the battle torturing and damaging Vulkan in an attempt to kill the Perpetual Salamander, but to no avail. He personally cut Vulkan's head off, ripped his throat out with a fork, stabbed him in the chest, and tore him into pieces. He also separately had him eviscerated, shot with hundreds of bolter shots at close range, left in a starship's engine's venting shaft, and threw him into space naked. Regardless of the death, Vulkan regenerated and lived again. However, the pain was always there, dull and raw, even after death. Kurz was frustrated, changing tactics, trying to make Vulkan admit that he was the same monster that he had accused Kurz of being years before. Using warp magics, Kurz made Vulkan live through hundreds of mental trials. In every one, Vulkan was made to fail, and innocents died before Vulkan's eyes. Even then, despite his anguish, Vulkan would not break, and Kurz, in his frustration, decided to end things in a duel. Using a maze designed by Perpetual, Vulkan would have to navigate to the centre and find his hammer, Dawnbringer, with which he could use to escape along with the corpses of Vulkan's comrades. Dawnbringer had a small teleporter built into it, to be used in emergencies to escape, and Vulkan had hoped to use it. However, when he reached the centre, the hammer was inside an energy shield, and Vulkan could not reach it with his bare hands. Kurz arrived to taunt and fight the Primarch, and in a rage Vulkan managed to grapple with Kurz barehanded and use his brother's living body to batter through and break the shield holding the hammer. Managing to activate the teleporter after final insults were traded between him and his brother. The teleporter, not aligned to any specific place, flung Vulkan through the warp and into the upper atmospheres of Macragge, homeworld of the Primarch Guilliman and his Ultramarines, where the forces of the Imperium were regrouping. Recovering the body, the Ultramarines were initially unable to identify this charred husk that had fallen through the atmosphere as nothing more than a disgusting statue of once flesh. However, over several days, Vulkan's body began to regenerate, and eventually returned to life, shocking the apothecaries who were studying the body. Guilliman was furious upon receiving word of this occurrence that no one could explain his brother's sudden appearance, having thought him killed on Istvan, or how his body had been returned to life. What was worse, Vulkan's mind had not regenerated and he was left incoherent and violent, attacking any who approached him. Strangely, Vulkan had formed some sort of mental bond with Kurz during his extended captivity with his brother, and was able to sense that Kurz had secretly come to Macragge and was hunting the leaders of the Imperial forces. Breaking free of the chains that held him and pillaging Guilliman's armory, Vulkan began to hunt the Night Haunter. The two fought across the surface of Macragge, and Vulkan realised he could regenerate faster if he focused his will, allowing him to create new advantages in the fight against Kurz that Kurz lacked. At one point, Kurz was able to shoot Vulkan's head off, which dropped the Salamander's Primarch off a cliff. His head had regenerated before Vulkan had hit the ground below. As this duel was fought, secretly another Perpetual arrived on Macragge known as John Grammaticus, tasked by a secretive cabal to kill Vulkan with Fulgurite, a frozen form of the Emperor's power. He was ordered to give this to Kurz to use on Vulkan, as only a Primarch could kill another Primarch. Before he could hand the Fulgurite to Kurz, the Elder Seer Eldrad Ulthran appeared before Grammaticus. He convinced the Perpetual that if he used the Fulgurite on Vulkan rather than Kurz using it, then he would lose his own immortality, but Vulkan's mind would be restored, and the balance of the Primarchs would be restored to equal numbers. Grammaticus stabbed Vulkan, and both were killed in the resulting explosion, whilst Kurz escaped. Grammaticus regenerated, but knew he only had one more life, but Vulkan remained dead. His corpse was reclaimed by his brother Primarchs, and was placed in a stasis capsule made by Guilliman's own hand, guarded by the few salamanders on Macragge until he could be returned to Nocturne. Some salamanders guarding the stasis pod swore they could hear a heartbeat coming from inside the pod, but these thoughts were dismissed. Eventually, Vulkan's body was returned to Nocturne, and with a final sacrifice by the captain of the Pyro Guard, Vulkan was restored to life at Mount Deathfire. After this resurrection, little records of Vulkan's history in the Heresy exist. Some say he opposed the Codex Astartes due to his legion's greatly reduced size. After the Heresy was concluded, Vulkan left his sons and vowed to return at the end of times. He did reappear 1500 years later, defending an imperial world, Caldera, from orcs, and was eventually returned to Terra to quiet the bickering of the Council of Terra. He led the final drive against the orc boss who had assaulted Caldera, known as the Beast, on Ulanor, the site of the Emperor's largest single victory and the War Master's ascension. Whilst the Beast was slain, Vulkan again vanished, saying only that he would return for the final battle, and little more, although the Salamanders today believe he can be returned should they collect all 9 of Vulkan's artifacts. That's everything I wanted to say today. Thank you for listening. If you have a comment or want to leave a note for me, you can leave it in the comments section below, or you can send me a personal message. If you're still interested in my Dark Heresy livestream game, then the next game will be on the 25th of July, so I look forward to seeing those who are interested there. In any case, thank you for listening. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.